This upcoming spring, we Europeans will be presented with a ballot. We'll be asked to voice our opinions, concerns and hopes about our union and its future through the vote for our European Parliament. But what's in that vote? Is it just a box ticked? No. The continent of Europe is old. Its people have fought the states and their governments for inclusion, peace and democracy for centuries. Ever greater parts of society have come under the sway of that brilliant Greek and European invention, one person, one vote. In the past decades of globalisation, Europe has increasingly worked from its shared values, presenting a united front in trade, environmental laws, animal and human rights. But you can't vote for a continent. The continent of Europe may be old, but its European Union is just about 70. The Schengen zone 30, its currency the euro 20. And our direct vote for its parliament, a mere 40 years old. So what's in this vote? How will it move the EU's jumble of commissions, councils, courts and parliaments? And what's really at stake in the election? It's complicated, but bear with us. We'll attempt to make sense of it with you and put the European Parliament in its context. The same ancient Greek wisdom of democracy has taught us to group the governing powers into three separate ones: legislative, executive and judicial, the trias politica. First, the legislative power, drawing up the union's laws and budget. Like in most governments, this is done between two houses. The European Parliament is the house representing us as Europeans. This is where your upcoming vote will go. Representing the member states' own interests, we see the national ministers in the Council of the European Union. The European Commission is there to help find agreement between the two. Next, the executive power for current business and handling the union's crises. Full of public bodies and officials, but topped by one, the European Council. This puts our own prime ministers or presidents in charge of the union together, guided by a president of its own. In this executive branch, you'll also find the Council of the European Union and the European Commission in an executive capacity, making proposals and seeing to their follow-up. The Commission's president sits in with the European Council. And finally, there is the European Central Bank with a president of its own. Same as in our home government, all other executive bodies and agencies we thankfully don't need to know. What counts is this. The whole of the EU executive answers to the European, or the home parliaments, or to both, and to the courts. Which brings us to the third, the judicial branch. The EU's court, one judge from each country. They independently try cases involving member states, institutions, and even citizens and businesses. So much for the context. But it's not just context. Separation of powers has proven to make for balanced government and open society. The Union's separation of powers beats even that of some of its member states. Only the Commission and the Council of the European Union combine functions. They can change their executive hat for a legislative one. Now about your upcoming vote for the European Parliament. Its 700 plus members sit in Europe-wide groups on a spectrum from left to right, just like national parliaments. It has three roles. It speaks our minds as Europeans in legislation. Just recently, it voted EU rules for privacy on the internet, EU labour rules, EU laws to cut cross-border phone bills, and laws against plastics pollution. It summons before it the men and women of power, both European and national, to question them in public and call them to account. Essentially, it is the one theatre to stage the great issues of our continent. Today's main issue is the clash between two convictions, between nationalism and multilateralism. The European Union itself embodies multilateralism, the philosophy that states are better off when they renounce violence and intimidation between themselves and commit to peace, progress and liberty, open borders and liberal democracy. Nationalist leaders denounce it as dangerous for undermining individual countries' democracy and sovereignty by creating a superstate. But is the Union really becoming a superstate? Remember, Our elected home political leaders actually run the Union together from their European Council, with our elected ministers in the Council of the European Union and our directly elected Parliament members in the European Parliament. Our home states tower over the Union. It is they who've unanimously made and keep making its ground rules, the treaties. They do this on our watch as their voters. The upcoming election will stage this clash between the often populist nationalism and the Union's multilateralist ideas. The European Parliament is the one body fit to raise this issue onto the stage of our continent's public opinion. Far from phasing out the states, the Union makes them evolve united by opening up their markets, their borders, their societies and their voters to each other. Shall it keep being trusted to do so? The answer to that question is in your vote.